Hello, this is the Part-Time Economist, and welcome to our introduction to management and business leadership. Now, we're starting off with the book by Richard L. Daft, which is titled The Leadership Experience. There's quite a few chapters here, so I'm going to break it up into a few manageable segments. Let's start right off with Chapter 1, the Introduction to Leadership. Now, this book starts off by saying that the entire leadership paradigm has changed. In the past, leaders would have been a stabilizer, someone that was supposed to keep things on an even keel. Just keep the plant running, keep the mine running, just manage things as they're supposed to be. And what we see, especially within the last so many years, is that a manager or a leader is now a change manager. They're not fighting the change so much as they are trying to manage the change so that it can impact the organization in a successful way. Now, we also see the difference between a controller and a facilitator. The modern view of leadership is that the leader should be a facilitator. He should be allowing things to happen, supporting things to happen, as opposed to trying to control them. So, he also gives a definition of the differences between managers and leaders. Now, it's important to note that these two things are not exclusive, right? Managers don't replace leaders. Leaders need good managers to be working for them. What are some of the differences between a manager and a leader? A manager is planning and budgeting, whereas a leader is creating vision and strategy. So the way I like to look at it is a manager is focused on the day-to-day realities of operating the business. He's going to be planning and budgeting. He's going to be organizing, staffing, directing, controlling. He's going to be putting people where they need to go, assigning them to the tasks that need to be done. The leader is going to be providing visions and opportunities and values. In other words, he's the guy or the girl that's setting the long-range purpose of the organization, instilling the culture of the organization. And a leader uses influence. So the leader convinces others why a certain strategy should be followed. The leader convinces why a certain plant or a certain store should be opened in a specific location, whereas the manager uses his positional power. He says, this is the hours that you're going to work because I'm the manager and this is what needs to get done so the store can be successful. Again, these are not competing interests. The way I looked at it is that the leader is the one that's setting the course for the organization. He is saying where it wants to go. The manager is the one that's putting these ideas into practice on a day-to-day basis. He's enabling the success of the leader by carrying out his vision. Now, moving on to Chapter 2, Daft talks about three main perspectives on business research. He says that there is traits, behaviors, and relationships-based research. Now, this looks at the traits of a leader, how a leader behaves, and how a leader interacts with their subordinates. Contingency-based theories of leadership realize that everything in the world depends on something else. What might be warm weather in the United States could be very cold weather somewhere else. Everything is contingent and related to other things. And then lastly, he talks about the personal side of leadership. How does personality impact leadership? How does the relationship between the follower and the leader, how does this interplay work out in the business world? So, jumping right into trait-based leadership. The original research in this area was based on the great man theory. Sorry, because this research took place before a lot of women were in the workplace. Now, the great man theory states that there are several individuals that have risen to the heights of industry, the height of business, the height of power. And if we look at the traits that these people have, they're all going to have a little bit of a different trait, but we can hopefully also find traits that are in common. Perhaps they're all very outgoing, they're very intelligent, or they're very optimistic. Whatever these traits are, we can identify them with this trait-based research And then we can screen people for these traits. The ideas being that if we can screen people based on traits, we can put them into positions of leadership where they can make a difference. Now, the leadership and trait-based research didn't really find a uniform set of traits. They found that, not surprisingly, people differ in their traits. So they moved on to instead searching for behavior-based leadership. So not so much who a leader is, oh, this leader is smart, this leader is intelligent, but what a leader does. For example, does he lead in an autocratic or a democratic manner? An autocratic leader says, I'm in charge, this is the way things are going to be. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's hostile towards his employees or he doesn't like them. He just has more of a directive style. Whereas the democratic leader tries to involve more employee participation, tries to make the process more fair with regards to the decision making. And behavior-based research is still going on. But specifically, I want to look at the behavior and relationship-based research through the Blake and Mouton leadership grid. Now, this grid essentially realizes that managers, leaders, executives have a dual responsibility. They have a concern for their people, the people that work for them. We want to take care of them. We want them to be happy. We want them to like us. And of course, this is partly because we care about them as humans, as people, but it's also because we want to have happy employees that can be productive. Now, the second thing the leader has to worry about is the concern for results. At the end of the day, he has to meet a production figure, he has to meet a sales quota, he has to get something done. And at times, these two responsibilities can be competing. And what we see with the leadership grid is that on the left, we have concern for people ranging from 1 to 9, and on the right, on the bottom, concern for results ranging from 1 to 9. Now, the very lowest form of leadership is a 1-1 called impoverished management. This is someone that doesn't really care for their employees, and they don't really care for getting results either. Now, this kind of leader probably isn't going to be in the organization very long. And as we move to different locations in the grid, we can see that different people focus on different things. Some people might focus more on results with a less concern for people. In the bottom right-hand corner, this would be called authority compliance-based leadership. In other words, this kind of leader realizes that a task has to get done. He tells people how to do it and expects compliance. The opposite form of management would be a country club manager. This person has great concern for people, great concern for the people that are with him on a day-to-day basis, but he doesn't know how to get those results. It's almost like a fraternity, a country club, as opposed to a work. Now, in the middle, we have the aptly named middle-of-the-road management. Now, this kind of manager is balanced between people and results, but the difference between him and the team manager, we see the team manager, the gold star in the upper right. Now, both of them are equally balanced between people and results. The difference is that the team manager is not only balanced, but he gives his full amount of effort to the project, to the team, to the business. Whereas the middle-of-the-road manager, he's definitely balanced, but he's just not giving all of his energy to the company. So the Blake-Mouton leadership grid it's a very useful tool for seeing the interplay between getting results and caring for your people. Now, some other terms that are in Chapter 2 that I specifically wanted to cover are the vertical dyad linkage. Now, this refers to the fact that even though a leader is in charge of more than one subordinate, he may be in charge of a small team or he may be in charge of a very large company. The vertical dyad linkage says that he should try to form relationships on a dyad level. So that means 1, 1, 2. He should try to form these linkages on a personal level so that not only is he the leader of the company, but the followers actually see him as a personal leader as well, like he's invested in their success, like he cares about them, not just because they're part of the corporation, but because he works with them as a person. Moving on to chapter 3, we have the leadership experience, contingency approaches to leadership. Now, contingency, as I mentioned earlier, says that one thing depends on another. And a good example of this is the Hersey Blanchard situational leadership model. Now, on the left-hand side, we have a high concern for relationship behavior. On the bottom, we have a high concern for task-oriented behavior. Now, this looks very much like the leadership grid that we discussed in chapter 2. However, there are some important differences here. We see that while there's still that trade-off between tasks, which in the other example would have been called results, and relationships, which in the other example would have been called concern for people, we still have those two essentially same variables, but this time we see that a leader should focus their concern on either task or relationship based on the readiness of the subordinates. So, what does this mean? We're going to start off with subordinates who are low readiness. In other words, they're not particularly skilled at their job, or they're not also particularly skilled at their confidence. So, they lack motivation, but they also lack job knowledge. Now, when our subordinates exhibit this kind of behavior, we should follow a more authoritative leadership style. Because they don't really know what they're doing, we should give them clear, explicit instructions. Also, because they're not really that motivated to do their tasks, we need to give close supervision. We need to understand that our leadership can provide them the guidance and the direction to accomplish the task, that they don't really know how to do that proficiently, but that it can also give them the supervision, the following up, the checking on them, so that they know they need to complete the task. Now, as we move up to the coaching style for moderate readiness, this is when our subordinates have good motivation. They want to complete the task, but they're still not that skilled. In other words, the will is there, but the skills just aren't. In this example, we need to provide them more task instruction, clarification. We need to focus our efforts on helping them with the task. They already have the motivation, so we don't need to be overbearing, constantly telling them, hey, do your best, hey, do better. They already have the motivation, so we want to focus instead on helping them to learn the task. Now, as we move on to the top left corner, the supporting style for high readiness, in this situation we see that our subordinates have a very high level of skill in the task. They're very accomplished in the task, but they perhaps lack the direction, right? They have skills, but they don't really know, they don't have the confidence that they need to put this into action. In this example, we would want to include them through participation, support, consultation. We're trying to help them develop the emotional, the more soft skills to put their actual task skills into action. And then moving on to the entrusting style of leadership for very high readiness. This is when the subordinates not only have the skills, but they also have the motivation, the soft skills necessary to complete their tasks with very little intervention. And at this point, the leader turns over responsibility to the subordinates because they already know what they're doing, they know how to accomplish it, they want to accomplish it. So our job is to enable them, to support them, but not to interfere with their work in a micromanaging way. So again, the situational leadership model is very good because it shows that different kind of subordinates react to leadership in a different kind of way. Some other terms in chapter 3 are path goal theory. Now, path goal theory says that a leader should clarify or increase the rewards to motivate his subordinates to perform. So, specifically with my time in the Army, I didn't know about path goal theory then, but we had this one soldier and he really wanted to move on and go to a specialized school. He wanted to learn some additional skills through the Army. And the thing was, he didn't have a solid base of his current job understanding. He wanted to do, the high, cool stuff, but he didn't have a solid grasp of the fundamentals of his job. So my job was to show him how the basic skill sets would lead to him becoming a more effective soldier, how learning the basics would enable him to go do these other things that he wanted to do. So just a brief example of path goal theory. You clarify the rewards so that your workers see how to get from one point to another. Now, one other term that I want to briefly discuss is the Vroom-Yago model. Now, this, at least for me, was a very complex model, and it's trying to illustrate how much a leader should be involved with a decision. Now, there's a whole bunch of variables that talk about how much the leader should be involved. It depends on the leader's experience, the subordinate's experience, the level of commitment that's needed in a decision, the significance of the decision. It's a very complex model, and I mainly included it here mainly for your awareness. This has been the first 3 chapters of Richard Daft's book, The Leadership Experience. I hope that you found the review useful, and hopefully you'll come back next time as we continue our study.